So Māori kind of have struggled being forced off their lands and having to live in these swamp areas, and then having to, into the 20th century, having to come into the cities and also adjust to urban lifestyle. But I noticed John spoke about racism and the definitions of racism, and I'll actually give you the official definition of racism. It is the attitudinal or ideological phenomenon that accepts racial superiority, and when present in those with power, justifies them using that power to discriminate against and deprive others of what is rightfully theirs on the basis of their race. So what that means is the people in New Zealand that have the power is certainly not Māori.
So who's being deprived of their money to pay for Māori scholarships? Is it Māori?
Well, no one's being deprived because they are...
where does the money come from? Where does it come from?
From treaty settlements.
And who pays those?
The Crown.
And who pays their taxes to the Crown?
Māori.
Everybody, doesn't it?
Got him. Look, it's those 80% once again who are being fleeced. Look, you've skipped a whole period of history. Maori always do this. These radical Maori always skip to the confiscations. Confiscations had a cause, Joe. Now here's a guy. His name is Wiremu Tamihana. He was one of the more moderate chiefs. Can you see that?
Give me a second. You got to put that up a little.
A little higher.
A little bit higher more.
I'm reading
and pull it back a little bit.
Pull it back.
Pull it up, way back. Way back and up. There you go. That's about right. I'll read that for you. I shall spare neither unarmed people nor property. Wiremu Tamihana, July 18, 1863, on the Waikato plan to attack Auckland.
He was going to kill every man, woman and child in Auckland. That's what he was planning to do. He was one of the more moderate ones. The Maori were trying to drive the Pākehā into the sea. Now, I don't think they were going to have swimming lessons when they got there. They were going to kill everyone. They'd signed a treaty, and they breached it, as Sir Apirana Ngata very unhelpfully pointed out. Our people rose up. They were naughty. They rose up. They were warned. They were... and here's another one. Now, about here, this is Governor Grey. Oops.
Down a little. Those who wage war against Her Majesty or remain in arms must take the consequences of their acts.
And I won't put up the other slides. The other ones go, and must understand they will forfeit the right to possession of their lands guaranteed to them by the Treaty of Waitangi. These lands will be occupied by a population capable of protecting for the future the quiet and unoffending from the violence with which they have been threatened. Now, I argue that Governor Grey is New Zealand's Lincoln. Thank God we had Governor Grey, or we wouldn't be here. He was New Zealand's Lincoln. He kept his country together. That's what a governor did in those days. He was a much stronger leader than anyone I can think of since. And he did what he promised. You know, they rose up and he took their lands off them. Now, one can argue about the quantity, and some of them were given back, some of them weren't. You can certainly argue that had the Maori won, they would have confiscated a hell of a lot more than land. They would have confiscated, by their own track record up to that point, the lives of every man, woman and child, and they were claiming to want to do the same. They didn't attack Auckland because Grey stopped them. So I want to inject that into the discussion when we start moaning about confiscations. It must be put in context that the confiscations were done because they waged war on the Crown and lost.
Now, if there is support for Māori out there, my personal belief is in volunteerism. For example, I've filmed a number of and interviewed a number of Māori activists and tried to help them get the word out about their various causes, the struggles of their hapu, and so on and so forth. That's how I contribute in my own way to the success of Māori. I don't take from other people and give to anybody else what I'm not willing to give up myself. Is there a disconnect and perhaps a lack of community motivation to help Māori directly, perhaps because they're being forced to do it instead of being asked?
Well, yes, I think that people don't like to be forced, especially on false pretenses when they know that the facts are not being presented properly. I don't know any racists. I certainly know I'm not one. The people that are accused of being racist, I think, are well-meaning. People like Martin Dutre lived among Maori, got his information about the Celtic New Zealand, which is a bad choice of word, really, but the pre-Maori people, he got that from the Kaumatua that he lived among. He's a very warm man, and he is well-disposed towards Maori. So am I. I want to see them do well. I just happen to come from that sort of right-wing thing. It's like if it's a difference between a soft mother and a tough dad, if you like. Now, I think you can argue that a strong dad, not a violent one, a strong dad is a pretty good parent when it comes to it. He doesn't choke his kids with sweets, and that's what your sort of right-wing in politics, if you like, is saying. It's still love. It's just a tougher love, and it's saying, look, you don't get anywhere by lying around on welfare. You've got to actually turn up for a job, that sort of thing. That's another kind of love, but it's still love.
One would argue, John, that one needs both a soft mother and a hard father.
Yes.
And at the moment, the government is depriving not just Maori, but everybody of that.
Yeah, I mean, if a kid says, "Can I have a box of chocolates?" The easy thing to do is say, "Oh yeah, sure," because you'll love me and you'll think I'm wonderful. You may not in 10 years' time when when your teeth have fallen out. Yeah, there needs to be carrot and stick. There needs to be compassion, and we live in essentially a socialist society where we're more than anywhere else on earth. Probably people do get money for falling. Into hard times. It's just a question of degree of money and, how much is enough.
Can I ask? Joe, I think your speakers are up a bit loud there. There's feedback. Joe, I was wondering, where does the disconnect happen here? Because I see that there is a racism problem in New Zealand. Anybody who knows New Zealand knows that there is at least a little bit of racism out there. I've got cousins from up north. Bro, trust me, they're racist. And it exists. It's a very real thing. I'm wondering, where's the disconnect? When does it stop being a racial thing and when does it start being a political ideology thing? Because I noticed that the two people here debating whether or not to socialise help for Māori, one happens to be from a left-wing party and one has rather right-wing views. Is there a disconnect or are they one and the same?
Yes, Vinny, there is a disconnect. Part of the reason that stems from the racism of New Zealand is the false histories that are being portrayed by people like Martin Dutre. Now, the foremost expert in the New Zealand wars is James Belich. He wrote the New Zealand Wars. James Belich. Now, as John mentioned, the invasion of Auckland, he denies it. He denies it emphatically. He says that Māori had no intention of invading Auckland because the trade was just too good. They were trading with Auckland City. What the invasion of the Waikato was a defensive war that would be precisely because there were power sites built at Rangariri, and what Governor Grey had done is he marched 2/3 of the British Army down Great South Road to attack the Waikato for land acquisition. Nothing more. It wasn't to help the natives. It was just for greedy land acquisition. Now, I know about John's obsession with Saparana Ngata, which he's actually taken Saparana Ngata's life out of context and cherry-picked out bits of his life that are appealing to him, I like to present James Fitzgerald. Now, James Fitzgerald was a Pākehā man, and he was born in the United Kingdom, and I got this this information out of the Parliament debates on November 5th of 1863, and this explains in depth that Maori had no idea that they were going to be invaded in the Waikato. I'll read it out. This, sir, is proposed to be done. This great, what I call, this enormous crime is proposed to be perpetrated against a race whom have been refused the right of representation in this house, who at this moment are totally and absolutely in ignorance that we are about to make this great invasion upon their privileges. I'll go forward. I know that it has been, and it has sometimes been said, that the policy which has been advocated by one party in this country has been a policy dictated solely by the desire to acquire lands for the settlers. I object to this upon the grounds that these two grounds. I object first upon the ground that it is contrary to the Treaty of Waitangi, which distinctly guaranteed and pledged the faith of the Crown that the lands of the natives shall not be taken from them except by the ordinary process of the law, that is, taken within the meaning of the treaty. Lastly, again I object because I conceive the provision to be in direct opposition to the section of Constitution Act which debars us from making any law which is repugnant to the law of England. So what he's done there is he's described that in the first section that Māori have no idea they're about to get invaded. Secondly, what he's also said is that the people who are voting in Governor Grey have voting him for a single purpose, is to grab land for themselves. It's land acquisition. It's nothing more. These ideals of Queen and country are just rubbish. It's land acquisition.
Like a corporation financing John Key because they want to acquire power companies or something.
And lastly, the land acquisition was illegal because it was inconsistent with the Constitutions Act. Now, in the Treaty of Waitangi, Māori had been guaranteed they were British subjects under British law, so that in the Constitutions Act of England, the state is not allowed to procure private land. So all of this history that is being told by Martin Dutry and John and the NZCPR and all these other organisations, and that single statement debunks all of that information.
What do you make of this? Is this visible?
Yep, that's visible.
This is the amount of land that was sold willingly by Maori before 1840. The whole South Island and a fair chunk of the north. You know, that's the thing. Of the 25 million acres or whatever it is, acres I think, hectares of New Zealand, about 23 million was happily sold. You see, Maori were not sheep farmers. They didn't know about making money from trees or sheep. Their surplus land was surplus land. It was just so many trees. They were using a certain part of it, and the rest of it, if they could get a buck for it, which they weren't using, damn right they were going to, and they did, in large numbers.